today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
This Eric Bieniemy, Ron Rivera story. So let me take you back to yesterday. You first see it. You see probably a headline first.
Yeah.
As you start to look into this story and do some actual reporting on it, what do you find? What do you think is interesting? What do you think is important about this?
Well, I made sure Nikki Javala, who works for the Washington Post, had tweeted the whole quote. So I made sure to read the whole quote. And by the end of the quote, I was like, what in the heck is going on here? Because it didn't make sense, A, because I felt like that's interesting. Why would I've covered the NFL a long time, even in Washington, and head coaches, they don't tell us a lot. They tell us what they want us to know. It's a lot of stuff they keep in. I was like, why is he even saying that players were complaining or there was, rumblings about Eric's intensity, number one. Number two, I was a little surprised that Rivera said when guys came to him, he said, well, talk to Eric. Let him know how you feel. Because I know that Ron Rivera specifically brought Eric Bieniemy in there because he knew that what was being done on offense wasn't good enough, that the intensity wasn't where it needed to be, the tempo, the pace. Just there wasn't enough dog in this offense, right? And they just weren't good enough on offense. So that's why Eric is here. So I in my mind, if I'm a head coach and guys are complaining, I would say, hey man, you should feel free to talk to him, but let's make it clear. This is literally the reason I brought him in here. That's what I expected Ron to say. And then thirdly, the craziest thing to me was throwing Jack Del Rio in there. What he has to do with this, I don't know, especially since Eric Bieniemy has more Super Bowl rings than Jack Del Rio and Ron Rivera. And he's won them more recently and been around a Super Bowl caliber offense more recently. Now, again, the reporter in me, the beat writer in me, instinctually says, let me get to the bottom of this. So I was making calls. I talked to a lot of different people in the building. I knew yesterday it was a non-issue in the building. I knew that Rivera had apologized to Eric Bieniemy. Essentially what he said today, which was, I completely put my foot in my mouth. That was not what I intended. That was not the spirit of what I was trying to say. And Eric, he's a cool guy. He's like, listen, man, I understand. This is not a big deal. And it's not internally. But I think because of who Eric Bieniemy is, given the fact that he unfortunately has become the poster child for equities in how the NFL conducts its hiring practices for head coaching jobs, that Ron Rivera talking about Eric and undermining him as he's trying to praise him, I think it ends up being a polarizing topic because we know that Eric Bieniemy, given his just strictly off his resume, should have been giving a head coaching job just off of merit alone. If Doug Peterson and Matt Nagy have gotten jobs coming out of KC where they weren't the primary play callers because Andy Reid was there, then you would think that those two, Eric Bieniemy winning Super Bowls would give him a leg up in those conversations with teams.
You would think.
What you would think? But here, Craigie, here's what I found funny today, because I was doing Get Up today on ESPN, and I said Ron Rivera is going to talk to the media before practice, and he will let them know I messed up yesterday. That is not what I meant to say. And Ron did. However, Ron brought out a piece of paper, and that's where I was like, ugh, I get it. I get why he has a prepared statement, because yesterday he was just talking off the cuff, and he put his foot in his mouth. So he wanted to make sure that he got his message across the way he wanted to. But with something like this, it just looked like it wasn't heartfelt again. So it almost was like 2 days in a row where it's just not quite right. And it seems fairly simple to say, you know what, guys, yesterday I messed up. Here's the deal. I love Eric Bieniemy. I brought him in here to change the culture. It's going to be a culture shock. Yes, sir, but that's what we want. Eric wants guys to be comfortable being uncomfortable, and I want that too, and that is it. Now, let's go to work and practice. That's all. You know what I'm saying? It didn't have to be like a typed out statement read from a piece of paper. if the sentiments yesterday was really, I like Eric. And to be fair, I was told the complaints about Eric and stuff, it was early in camp. First week of training camp, guys were like, man, this guy goes nonstop all the time. Like, whoa. But since then, tempo's been better. Practices, like offenses look better. Like guys kind of see where Eric's coming from. But Eric has said, like, listen, this offense needs to be better. Sam Howell has to be up to snuff. And Sam Howell is a guy who takes hard criticism, wants hard criticism, seeks it out. So this conversation and this whole Eric Bieniemy Rivera thing actually gives me more confidence that Sam Howell, this could be a good season for him. Because if Sam Howell wasn't rubbed the wrong way by Eric Bieniemy's like tough love, tell it like it is, I think you need that. I think it's time. Like, this is a good roster, but guys, you got to have those dogs. Like when it's playoff time, like you got to be able to win games. You got to be able to put up points. And I think Eric is coming from Kansas City where they're used to winning. That is it, and that is what needs to come to Washington.
Kimberley Martin from ESPN is with us here on The Hoffman Show. So this will probably surprise you, but I was on the this is not a big deal bandwagon yesterday and very much remain there because I think what was ultimately described was a process that worked. Like players were like, damn, this is different. This is intense. And Ron was like, go talk to Eric. They talk to Eric. They ultimately get to the result they want, which is they're on the same page. And like you said, they're improving. I do think that the criticism, though, of like the delivery from Rivera, which was characteristically bungled. And, you know, if you want to say more honest, I'm never as a reporter going to be like, oh, yeah, that guy's too honest. Like, I don't want people not telling me the truth. Covering Belichick sucks.
Right.
Like, I want people to be honest. I want people to be forthcoming. And I want people to be insightful. And I guess where I struggle with this, Kimberly, is like, I think sometimes we hear things and we go, oh, everyone's going to make a big deal out of this, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think ultimately if we understand what Rivera meant, I don't see why it's that big of a deal to just go like, yeah, no, they seem to have a good feedback loop. Excellent. They're moving forward. They're getting better. They're growing. And why this became such a kerfuffle, except for, and I promise I'll end this in a question, not just lobbing opinions at you, but like, except for the part, and we had a caller who said this in the last segment I thought was really good, which is the perception of Bieniemy. Do you think Rivera has kind of an elevated responsibility here because of Eric's path, because he's been passed over, that like, yeah, man, what you described was good, ultimately for Eric, but you have to understand how it's going to be perceived, and you need to be thinking ahead like that. Is that the error ultimately here?
Yes, 1,000%. Especially, again, like I mentioned, bring up Jack Del Rio. Like I've heard Ron Rivera defend Jack Del Rio against all sorts of different types of tweeting that he's done in the past and comments where you're like, whoa, where did that come from? And Ron Rivera has literally defended Jack Del Rio. Like, that's his guy, and that's fine. But in this situation, context is everything. And as a head coach, because part of Ron's messaging, what he was saying was like, Eric's never been a head coach. You know, Jack and I have been head coach. You know, it's
yeah. And for clarity, that was the one part that I crushed him on yesterday. I was like, you can't, like, what is that all about? That part was nuts to me. Right.
And so part of being a head coach is understanding we're all human. So it's not killing Ron Rivera for making a mistake necessarily, but it's an important lesson here as far as understanding Eric Bieniemy just doesn't move as Eric Bieniemy. Like he represents a larger conversation, unfortunately for him, and how they're quite, like, it just seems like at every turn there seems to be added criticism with him that doesn't exist for other people. Because when we talk about culture shocks right now, the culture shock isn't just happening in Washington. It's happening in Denver, where Sean Payton is, talking about, I don't want guys who are done playing preseason snaps and sitting there with their Gilligan hats on. They need to be focused. And it's like, dude, it's preseason. Like, if we're, there's a culture shock happening in Arizona where players have said, whoa, this is pretty intense. We're not used to this. Like, this is what happens when teams aren't good. They bring in other people who have an attitude of, we're going to do this my way now. And so I think Ron Rivera's failure was just not understanding the full context and how in trying to praise Eric for being this guy who, like, he stands firm, but he also has to learn to relax. Like, it's sort of like you're critiquing a guy who you literally brought in for this sole purpose, which is to kick everybody in the butt on offense and get this going in the right direction, because we know how good this defense is. We need the offense to match up. But you know, I think it's not an issue internally. It wasn't an issue yesterday. It's not going to be an issue. And I think the interesting thing is Eric Bieniemy is saying, listen, I'm going to be judged on the job I do. It is a difficult task. The offense is his. The same way Ron Rivera said, hey, man, go talk to the assistant head coach. Go talk to the OC. Let him know how you feel. It's on Eric Bieniemy's shoulders to make sure Sam Howell is ready and this offense is ready. And that's why Eric Bieniemy is like, I'm going to go 120 every day. And clearly players weren't ready for that. But I think players need to be ready for that because you have new ownership. You have a team that's been on the cusp of play, you know, being good, playoff, like gets in the playoffs, loses. And right now it's about building a winning program. And like, you got to have sustained success. And Bieniemy has seen that. So hopefully this is a non-issue going forward. As far as the public perception, you know, depending on how the season goes. And it's clear that Ron Rivera and Eric Bieniemy continue to be in lockstep because this team needs them to be in lockstep, and all these players need to get on board with the culture shock that's happening in Ashburn because it is long overdue.
Totally. And there are very human growing pains that are going along with that, which I think is what Rivera ultimately described. But like, the question is whether or not you get through the growing pains. But along with that has been this, and that's like that's the barometer of success or failure. You either get on board eventually and you win, or you don't and you lose. There's kind of no other option. But there has been kind of this commentary about, well, actually, these growing pains mean these players are soft. And I'm very curious on your perspective on that, because you talk to so many coaches, so many players, so many agents, not just here, but throughout the league. And some of this is just like generational differences in communication. Some of this is just like, I don't know, fans expect fingers to be snapped and things to be fixed. Like, I don't know, and not just fans, some media. Seems like some former players think that that's how it works too, and maybe it did in their career. But like, is there kind of this, I don't know, like, what do you make of the soft narrative? I don't have a better way to ask it.
So I did say this on First Take today. I said when I read the comments at first, my first thought was like, man, these players are coming off really soft. Like, what? Like, really? We're complaining about, like, oh, he's riding us too hard. Like, what? Like, you guys have not. Right now, it's like in the NFC East, we're talking about the Eagles and the Cowboys. We have no idea what the Giants or the Washington Commanders will look like. That's the reality. We don't know how good either of those teams will be. And I know that I know, like, Terry McLaurin, like, I know these guys aren't soft, right? I know, like, offensive players, like, I get it. And I understand all players and here's the other part. All players kind of complain in training camp. Like,
right.
It is part
training
of
camp
it. Is
sucks.
part of,
it's
like,
hard.
Right. It is part of just like the rite of passage. Like, you go through training camp. This is why so many guys are like, you know what? I'll just sign. The free agents are like, I'll just wait till we're closer to week 1. I'm not dealing with training camp. I'm good because it sucks. No one wants to be there. No one wants to do it. It's just a necessary process. That's why I was a little surprised that he mentioned it, because Ron, coaching for as long as he has literally heard players complain about training camp for years, right? But I don't know. It's not just Washington complaining, because like I said, in Arizona, guys were complaining about it. In Denver, guys are like, damn, like, Sean Payton really is like taking this, like, this is his show. This is no longer Broncos country, let's ride Russell. Like, it is Sean Payton's world there, right? So there is going to be a culture shock. I think what made me feel better in all the conversations I had yesterday afternoon and last night was that the I don't say complaints, but like the whining or whatever it was, it subsided because guys get it. Having talked to Eric, they understand the motivation. It may be different from what they're used to. And it's a different generation of players. the interesting thing is, what do you do if you're an old school coach? If you're an old school coach like Sean Payton, do you want to hear guys whining when you're a coach who's used to the two-a-days and now players don't even do two-a-days and they're still complaining about the rigors of training camp? Do you really care? It's like, do you want to win or do you just want to compete? What's the answer? Because if we bust our butt now in August, if we focus on the fundamentals, if we get our mind right now in August, then that should hopefully alleviate some of the growing pains that you might see in September. As long as players buy in, as long as they fully understand that there's a method to the, quote, madness, Washington should be straight. They really should.
So, and that's kind of where I landed when I read the comments more. To me, it spoke to less of like a toughness and, softness or whatever. And also like Eric's yelling, they're running 100 plays of practice. I feel like guys just didn't get it. Like, didn't get what their assignment was, didn't get what they did wrong. And like, it felt like some of the aha moments and the understanding also were tactical. And I'm curious from your conversations, like I'm reading between the lines. You were able to talk to some of the people involved. How much of it was that as well, where it's like, yeah, dude yelled at me because I did the thing wrong and I still don't understand what I did wrong. But now that, Ron's like, well, you should go talk to him. They do. And now some of that understanding is not just about we're running this tempo for conditioning or for mental toughness or for whatever some of these almost intangible reasons are, but some of it actually being tactical in nature, and that's going to be a part of the growth and hopefully success of this Washington team.
I think part of being a coach, position coach, assistant coach, OC, head coach, is sometimes you can't coach all the guys the same way. People have different personalities. I was a kid who, like, when starting at like 4 and 5, my favorite question was why? Like, why is that? Why is that? Like,
stunning.
You would have to make it it's shocking. You need to make it make sense for me. And it used to drive my mom crazy. But I think there are players like that as well. Like, what is this about? Why am I doing this? Now, if I were one of Eric Bieniemy's players, maybe I'd be like, what the hell? Why are we doing this? And he might bark at me. But if part of it is understanding where Eric comes from, like the man, he didn't come from. I'm gonna pick what's like a terrible team. Gosh, I don't want to do this today. Like, it's not like he came from some like bottom of the barrel team and just came over and you're like, why am I listening to this guy? This man literally spent games talking to Patrick Mahomes. This man literally months ago just got his second Super Bowl ring. Like, there has to be some sort of ownership on the players to get on the same page with the OC as well, and understand that whatever was done in the past or whatever you were used to is not what it's going to be now. Same way with the Jets and Aaron Rodgers. Like, guys, their wide receivers are talking about, Aaron, it's kind of hard to read his mind. Like, sometimes, like, we'll go up to the line of scrimmage and then the play is this, and then he'll just say, like, oh, wait, with a hand signal, I'm going to change it. And you're like, what? Here's the thing. You don't have time to be confused. You got to get on Aaron Rodgers' page, because he's the guy that will make this thing go. Same thing in Washington. Like, Eric Bieniemy, you got to get on his page, because he's letting you know that we're going to do this my way, but there is a reason. I will be your biggest advocate, but I will be your toughest, like, critiquer, because we know that, because I've seen this works. So I think what Ron was good about was encouraging dialogue. I think the more times players talk to their coaches, know their coaches better from just man to man talking to them, woman to woman, if there's females on the staff, like, I think that goes a long way in building the relationships and building a solid foundation, so that this man isn't just riding me to ride me. He is literally trying to help me and this offense get better. And so I think they'll be okay if these guys totally buy in.
Totally. And it's what I appreciated about Eric's comments yesterday, because he was like, yeah, I'm cool with it. I got an open door policy. They can come in and talk anytime, and I'm happy to tell them why. So, like,
Eric Bieniemy will tell them exactly what Eric Bieniemy feels.
Yes, and possibly he will reference himself as Eric Bieniemy in the third person. That was spectacular yesterday. I was happy to be there, sitting there, listening to that. Kimberley Martin, ESPN NFL Insider. Catch her on Get Up, catch her on First Take, catch her on SportsCenter. What, NFL Live? Anything else you got coming up today?
No, thankfully you are the last thing I'm doing today.
Nice. Nap time.
I've been up since 3. So watched Hard Knocks last night. So I've been up for a while. So yeah, but I'm glad I can cap my evening off with you.
I appreciate that. We miss you around here, but great to look up and see you on TV. I always get super pumped. Like, yeah, that's my friend. That's another one of the Syracuse Mafia up there. Kimberly, always appreciate it. Hopefully we'll have you back sooner rather than later.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Craig.
Kimberly Martin, everybody, with us here on The Hoffman Show. Really good stuff. Really great insight.
What's up, kiddos? It's your boy Clinton Yates from ESPN. It's The Hoffman Show on the Team 980. Tell your mama I said what's up.